I didn't actually know a whole lot about this plane going into it, but what I found out when I started doing my research is that this is the byproduct of what you'd get if you got the F4 and the F-18 to have a kid. Before we get started, I did read all of your comments on the last video. I appreciate all the feedback that you guys gave me, so we'll be switching back to the faces in the full screen that many of you preferred for the meat and potatoes of my videos. I will also be re-uploading the previous video sometime in the future with the old format re-equipped, so thank you all for bearing with me in that very bold experiment and looking for more ways of bringing you my usual bread and butter. And speaking of bread, today we're going to talk about the French Rafale, which in English translates to the gust of wind, or more effectively, the burst of fire. This is France's top-of-the-line fighter jet, and if you get caught on the bad end of the buckshot, it will ruin the rest of your life. But because of its similarities, it often gets caught in the shadow of a similar aircraft, despite being completely unrelated. Now, the Rafale develops about as fast as a dictatorship panic-throwing troops out of revolt, so we're gonna make like Sonic and go fast. By the late 1970s, the French had a lot of different aircraft that were all starting to age out across both their Navy and their Air Force. The problem is the Jaguar, the Mirage, the Crusader, and the Superintendant all covered a wide variety of roles and were all aging out at the same time. Commissioning an attack plane, a fighter plane, an interceptor, and an anti-ship attacker all separately at the same time would be stupidly expensive. So they decided to make the One Ring of Planes. One plane to rule them all. This would all take place under the umbrella of the French vision of strategic autonomy, aka being able to use their military however they wanted without having to suck somebody else's toes to be able to do what they wanted, like during the Suez Canal crisis. So the French would begin working on the Avion de Combat Tactique, or ACT program, in December of 1977 to start figuring out exactly how they were going to turn Skittles into an airplane, because this plane was going to have to make the enemy taste the rainbow of death. And once they figured it out, they would advance it into the Avion de Combat Experimental Program, or ACX, starting on October 30th, 1978 under the initial codename of Rapace, or Bird of Prey. But while the end result of this project would be cheaper than contracting multiple separate planes, making a literal Swiss Army knife for modern aerial warfare would still be incredibly expensive. So while their principle of strategic autonomy was important to the French, if they could find a peer or near-peer nation to partner with and share the cost of development, they wouldn't exactly be opposed.
I'll make that deal.
So when the opportunity showed up in 1979, the French decided to join the British and the Germans in the European Combat Aircraft, or ECA, program. This cooperation managed to last all of 2 years before falling apart, primarily because the French wanted to do things their way and weren't willing to negotiate. Britain and Germany insisted on a more cooperative approach to program leadership and wanted a high-speed interceptor that would use the Tornado's Rolls-Royce RB-199 engines. The French, on the other hand, were only happy to share as long as they didn't have to suck somebody else's toes to get the end result. So they wanted a centralized program leadership under the French Dassault Aviation Company to create a carrier-capable multi-role aircraft, which nobody else in the program needed, using a US-made engine until the French Snecma M88s were ready to replace them. And since France wasn't budging from that independence-only posture, the project eventually ground to a halt. And if you're not going anywhere, it's not really worth it to put more energy into it, so the governments of the project stopped funding it. No money means no airplane, and so in 1981, the French would go back to the ACX program on their own.
Why? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why are we still here?
Who is we? You speaking French, you wanted to be here.
But like I said, that was expensive, and since all parties involved needed new planes, 2 years later in 1983, the European nations were willing to try again. And this time, they brought more friends.
You couldn't stop me before. I was alone before.
The British, French, Germans, and now the Italians and the Spanish would all join forces for the Future European Fighter Aircraft, or FIFA, program. However, just as before, the French insistence for self-sufficiency and a naval aircraft would lead to more tensions and eventually France just leaving the project in 1985. So it was a good thing they hadn't exactly planned on getting what they wanted this time either. While France had been trying to negotiate other people into funding their airplane, they had already been funding their airplane. The ACX program had started picking out the Delta Wing and Canards as far back as early 1980 before even running the cameras for Eurofighter Take 1, and that design had been chosen and greenlit for prototype production by April 13th, 1983 after running in the background of the FIFA program. The first prototype would then enter production in 1984, and by April of 1985, the Rapace had been renamed to the Rafale. The Rafale prototype would be unveiled to the public 2 years after its green light to the day on December 13th, 1985, and would finally take flight on the 4th of July the next year using General Electric F404 GE400 engines as substitutes for the M88s. And speaking of 88s, by April of 1988, Dassault was ready to order their naval multi-role fighters. But they had a choice to make.
Decisions.
See, when the French actually went to purchase the Rafale, they got word of an offer from Boeing for FA-18 Hornets. And not only were those Hornets both available and relatively cheap, Boeing was putting them on the clearance shelf. The Rafale had just gone through 2 failed programs, came out on its own and just got clear of the prototype phase, and now it had to go up against the BOGO bundle. And then on top of that, the Cold War ended, causing budget cuts to military spending. But despite every obstacle placed before it, the Rafale would happen. The French hadn't come this far to start licking heels now. They would have their strategic autonomy, and finally, in the year 2000, the first Rafales would be delivered to the French Navy, the Rafale MF1, M meaning the naval version and F1 being the standard of capability. And that F1 standard was originally just made for the usual air to not there conversion, but after being fully operational in 2004, it wouldn't take long for the French Air Force to start receiving their Rafales. Not only did they get their own variants in 2005, the single-seat C and the twin-seat B variants, but the Rafale as a whole would turn out to be very much like its development process and start any percent speedrunning their puberty. The Air Force's Rafales were made to the new F2 standard, which could carry a ton of air-to-ground ordnance produced both domestically and abroad. The tech in the F2 standard would be matured by the following year, and both the Air Force and Navy would be fully operational with the F2 by 2008. And just when the F2s would finish setting up, the F3 standard would start coming out and fully embracing the next kind of multi-role aircraft, which Dassault calls omni-role. And now seems like a really good time to figure out what omni-role even means. We'll start with the word itself. It's got 2 parts. Omni, which means all, and roll, which means the way it gives you the freedom to choose which hole you want to through. Basically, if your military or defenses have a hole in them, this thing will go for them. And if it doesn't have any holes to go for, it will make new ones. I'm trying to tell you that the Rafale isn't going to discriminate when it comes to the means by which you are screwed. It will up everything it is told to look in the general direction of, making it the all-f***er, if you will.
Follow me on Twitter at the Crimson F***er.
Because this plane was literally made to do everything from quick reaction alert to nuclear deterrence with up to 14 hard points for ordnance, fuel tanks, and specialized equipment pods. Is it cloudy with a chance of fighter jets? Hit him with the British Meteor missiles or the French Mica EM or IR missiles. See some ground targets invading your favorite natural habitat? Show nature you care with various American and French guided missiles like the Paveways or ASM hammers. Has a certain factory just pissed you off lately? Whip out the Storm Shadow Scalp cruise missiles and remind them that their cities are not safe. Is there a ship breaking up the beauty of your local coastline? Show them the AM-39 Exocet missiles the British were so worried about during the Falklands War. And that's not even counting the 30mm cannon with 125 rounds, the Arios reconnaissance pod, the Damocles and Talios targeting pods, the up to 5 external drop tanks carrying 14,700 pounds or 6.7 metric tons of extra gas, a refueling pod, and even ASMPA supersonic nuclear cruise missiles. You know, just in case you wanted to give the souls of your enemies a sunburn at a speed that gives sound an existential crisis. And you might think that all the ordnance would really slow a plane down, and that load does limit the Rafale's maneuvers from 9 to 11 Gs down to 5. But the only reason it can even carry an entire bad guy flavored Febreze production line on a chassis made for speed is because of the giant Dorito chip that the engineers call a Delta Wing. It's a simple case of bigger is better. Delta Wings give you more wing area for less wingspan, which means you have more room to lift and therefore more room for the old asses to ashes technology. They're also a lot easier to build with the higher sweep angles you need for high speeds. But thanks to modern fly-by-wire controls, one of the original arguments, that being higher lift efficiency because of lift producing canards instead of downforce producing tails, really doesn't apply anymore. And a Delta Wing with canards almost always requires a fly-by-wire control system to work, so of course the Rafale has one. Not only does this flex the canards as needed, but it also means the plane can control its roll, flaps, pitch, and air brakes all with just 2 pairs of control surfaces on the back of the wing. Most aircraft are looking at fighting the laws of Earth like a blacksmith making a special separate tool for each job, and the Rafale is doing all this with a pair of hammers. Oh Lord, that battle was beyond compare. Which is an argument you can somehow apply just as well to the engines. The twin Safran M88 jet engines can deliver 16,500 pounds or 7.5 metric tons of thrust in full burner each, or about 10,971 pounds with the afterburners off, which doesn't even remotely compare to a lot of American counterparts. I mean, we left the 25,000 pound class of engines behind when the 70s started, and that is exactly why I want to know what kind of magic they put in this airplane to get it to super cruise at sea level.
Oh, What?
Yeah, the Rafale can hold down just past Mach 1 at sea level with the afterburners in the off position in some of the most dense air 200 feet off the water, with both a full air-to-air weapons loadout and a centerline fuel tank. The French have somehow made a supersonic airplane where afterburners are optional, using less than half the max thrust of the F-22 Raptor. It may only top out at around Mach 1.8, but considering this thing puts out around as much thrust as an F-4 Phantom and can bust down the sound barrier like the Kool-Aid Man, there's gotta be a secret here somewhere. And if I had to guess, that secret is weight. The Rafale uses a mostly composite airframe, making it incredibly light, and the M88s also use an innovation called integrally bladed discs, usually just shortened to balisks. Normally, the high-speed rotors in the engines are made of a base ring and multiple blades that you insert into the ring. The balisks just make all of those into one part, making the entire engine lighter and more aerodynamic at the cost of being harder to maintain. But it's not really an issue in practice, since the engines can be replaced in about an hour, and the entire plane was designed to be cheap to fix by a team as little as one person in the first place. So the Rafale just gets a pair of engines that produce a thrust-to-weight ratio a bit over 1.1 with basically none of the downsides. Combine that with the extremely effective air brakes that can slow you down faster than you can speed up, and the Rafale might as well have a superpower for controlling kinetic energy.
Strike it again in the same spot.
And making the Rafale's performance even more ridiculous is that even an afterburner, it's incredibly fuel efficient. According to one French pilot, the Rafale burns less gas in afterburner at high altitude than the Eurofighter Typhoon does without afterburner. They can straight up start injecting the 10,300 pounds of internal fuel or more into the engines for the extra double donkey kick special and still be eating less than most of its peers. And despite all the ordnance, despite all the fuel, and despite somehow being both a weaponized Toyota Prius and a thrust brick with wings, this plane still turns around like a Benedict Arnold. The plane can manage higher angles of attack in its turns than most opponents. The pilot's seat pulls the F-16 trick and angles 30 degrees back to take the pilot's G-forces down a notch, and it's got the pressure-driven hands-on throttle and stick, or HOTAS, control. The only NATO aircraft Rafale pilots would ever state they consider challenging opponents in a genuine dogfight were the F-16, F-A-18 Harrier, and the Alpha Jet Trainer, because they could either match or overmatch the Rafale in either turn rate, angle of attack, or low-speed maneuverability, sometimes combined with a smaller visual profile, making them harder to track.
Now you see it, now you don't.
And speaking of tracking, the Rafale itself can be a little harder to track on radar. It isn't stealth by any means or stretch, but it does have radar scattering materials and patterns on the trailing edges of the canards and just inside the intakes. Within 30 degrees of the Rafale's direct front, the average radar cross-section is estimated to be around 0.33 square meters, which is not bad at all for a non-stealth fighter, with a full average radar cross-section of about 4.08 square meters. But here's the thing, the Rafale doesn't play defense using stealth, it plays defense by actively punching the missile sensors in the face using its Spectra. The Spectra is like a self-contained golden ticket to the electronic warfare domain. Let's say you're gonna fire a missile at a Rafale, okay? The Spectra system first gathers electronic intelligence on the radar frequencies you're using to track it. You fire the missile, now Spectra starts tracking the range and direction of the incoming missile from up to 250 kilometers away with a plus or minus 1 degree margin of error. It will also track its mode of guidance, that being radar frequency, heat-seeking, or even laser designation, whether the radar is on or not. That data is then transferred to an onboard library of missiles, where the plane identifies the missile by the noise it's making in the quiet space and checks out a countermeasure strategy book to tell it to shut up with. Spectre will then deploy that strategy in combination with pilot maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares, or using the 3 AESA jamming antennas, one at the base of each canard and one on the tail, to decoy or jam that missile and prevent a hit. And if that sounds crazy to you, that's because it is. This system allows the Rafale to perform ELINT missions, electronic intelligence, in the scenarios where those weapon systems they would want to track are actually being used, without the support of electronic warfare or suppression of enemy air defense's assets. This is a degree of self-sufficiency that I have yet to see another aircraft master. Anybody who says there's no I in team has never flown a Rafale before.
There is no I in team. However, there are 6 I's in it, I don't care how big the room is, I cast Fireball.
And if it's not playing defense, guess what? It's got things for that too. It was the first European aircraft to use an AESA radar. The RBE-52 has a reported maximum detection range of about 125 miles or 200 kilometers. And with recent upgrades, it is able to generate 3D maps for terrain following even over uncharted terrain and if the pilot is flying blind. The front sector optronics let it pick out who needs to dive via TV or laser feed, and it can even cosplay as a Twitch streamer with the Rover system, which can send live video feed of its targets to ground operators, both to prevent friendly fire incidents and literally live stream their kill streak to the chat.
Hospital. Sounds like another 25 kill streaks of me.
Now that's a long list of benefits to having a flying Swiss Army knife, but arguably the best one among them is that you can add it to any other international force for both combat and interoperability exercises, aka working together with other militaries to see how well you can cooperate on the spot. Because the Rafale isn't even built to just French standards, the naval versions are built to the American ones too, because the Rafales are the only non-US plane that can withstand the all-American yeet machines, aka the catapult takeoffs and arrested landings aboard US aircraft carriers. This actually stems from the fact that when they were designing the naval variant, they didn't have any land-based catapult launch testing facilities in France, so they had to go to the United States to run their over 100 tests. And since the French and US navies are held to the same standards, they hold a lot of interoperability exercises where they work together to use each other's stuff and make sure they are at the peak of their game when it comes to being on the same team, reaching interoperability levels as high as 95%. Most of the deck personnel's vests are even the same color across both services. One of the only differences is the purple ones, because on the American carriers, those are the refuelers, and on the French carrier, those are the priests. And some French pilots noted that when they started working with the Americans, they were completely confused as to why the Americans had so many priests on deck. I don't think it took very long to put it together that we're just that good at making people holy as f***. So it should be no surprise that the Rafale M is also the only non-US aircraft to have an engine replaced aboard a US aircraft carrier. On the 4th of June 2010, CVN-75 USS Harry S. Truman and R-91 Charles de Gaulle were performing naval interoperability exercises, and as part of it, I'm guessing that they kind of wanted to see how much they could do on the other side's boats. So the French landed one of the Rafale M F-3s on board the Truman, brought it downstairs, and hot-swapped the engine in 3 hours with 7 people. Is it the standard 1-hour maintenance window for the Rafale? Not really. Was it a pretty good time frame considering it was both the first time they'd done it on somebody else's boat, while also having an entire carrier's worth of paparazzi yelling World Star for the camera? Probably. And that interoperability may seem like a weird compromise to the whole strategic autonomy deal they had been on when they made this plane, but there's a difference between partnership and dependence, and while France may not be willing to be dependent, they are sometimes willing to work with people to solve the problems in front of them. And the first problem the Rafale got to look at helping to solve immediately followed 9/11 in the form of Operation Enduring Freedom. In 2002, the French sent over a unit of Rafale M's to support American efforts in the Middle East. The Rafales weren't even fully operational yet, and France is already sending them out to get stuff done. And to be fair, that is the perfect time to tease out the various issues that come with new planes, but since they only had the air superiority F-1 standard in service at the time, and Afghanistan wasn't exactly known for its air war, it kinda just flew around and looked pretty before going home.
Wow, looks crazy shiny.
Rafales wouldn't actually see combat until March 28, 2007, dropping bombs over southern Afghanistan, and they would finally get a spotlight in combat during the NATO-led intervention in Libya in 2011, better known as Operation Odyssey Dawn. Rafales would perform the first missions of the conflict, those being recon missions to map out targets with the Arios pod, followed by strike missions against those photographed targets. Thanks to the Spectre system, it would also not need seed or electronic warfare assets during those strikes. However, it should be noted that Libya's air defenses were so old and poorly maintained that Spectre was just overkill for the threat they were facing. There may be no kill quite like overkill, but it's actually thought that Libya's integrated air defense system was the least threatening of its kind in a long time. Regardless, the Rafale's combat self-sufficiency would still become a major marketing point for Dassault's sales to the rest of the world, of which there were many. I'm actually kind of impressed that there's apparently a running myth that the Rafale didn't sell to anyone, because 9 countries have already ordered this plane and even more are considering it. With the Omni-Roll capabilities reportedly fully matured by 2014 and the US's COSTA Act in 2017 sanctioning any country buying Russian military equipment, French ass-whooping gear was a nice way for countries to get their military fill without being tied by American political strings. So they basically started selling like a bakery that just put gluten-free bread on the rack.
Take the
God
glue
damn it.
out the bread.
The first country to receive an operational Rafale fighter was Egypt on February 16, 2015, and they would eventually order 55 of them. India originally ordered 36 and is considering more, and Qatar bought 36 as well. Croatia got 12 from the French Air Force along with Greece, who also bought 12 new ones, and the UAE, Indonesia, and Serbia have all ordered Rafales, although none of them have received those orders yet. Over 500 Rafales have been ordered all over the world, with 302 single-seat seats Cs, 157 twin-seat Bs, and 48 navalized Ms. Of that 500 plus, France has ordered 234 of their planned 286, which is about 50 less than the 336 they'd planned on buying when the whole program started. And even then, they're only planning on operating 225 of them now, 185 to the Air Force and 40 to the Navy after the sales to Greece and Croatia and the 7 write-offs from 13 crashes.
That's one too many numbers.
But some of these orders are not like the others, because the planes ordered by the UAE were made to be the next generation of Rafales, the F-4 standard. While the French were helping the US and the UK deliver airstrikes against chemical warfare targets in Syria on the 14th of April in 2018, they were also developing the next level of tactical diplomacy. The F-4 standard entered French service in 2023, and the Rafales are being upgraded to it as we speak. The new upgrade package would put on a Santa's sleigh of new toys. The nice list includes things like software updates and new programs for improving comms and situational awareness, and giving the front sector optronics a new infrared search and tracker IRST system with a claimed over 60-mile range. I say claimed though because IRST systems are always more effective when the target's running away from you, and the detection range is a lot shorter when they're approaching you and hiding their red-hot engines. The Not Phantom pack also gives the radar its 3D terrain map generation, upgraded jammers for the Spectra system, and a tall Scorpion helmet-mounted sight. Plus, the firepower gets an upgrade because who doesn't love more explosions, adding the next-generation Mica NG missiles and both bigger and smaller versions of the AASM Hammer air-to-surface standoff weapons. And it's likely they'll get more weapons made for the next generation of warfare, especially considering some of the upgrades the US is giving their aircraft, like the heat-seeking retrofit kit they added to the automatic precision kill weapons system, which was in turn a retrofit for the cheap Hydra rockets. The APKWS upgrade was created in the wake of the drone usage in Ukraine and the Iranian drone swarms thrown at Israel on April 13, 2024, which Rafales also participated in by shooting down drones crossing through Jordanian airspace. I think at this point it's pretty self-evident that it was a versatile combat platform with a spotless record. Was. I think you guys know what I'm about to get to, so let's get to it. On May 7, 2025, a full-scale escalation happened between India and Pakistan called Operation Sindoor. I won't get into too many details because there are plenty of other people discussing the conflict's events and history, but the important thing you need to know for this video is that there was an air-to-air fight between Indian and Pakistani planes. This fight reportedly claimed 1 F-16 Fighting Falcon and 1 JF-17 Thunder according to India, and according to Pakistan, 1 MiG-29 Fulcrum, 1 Su-30 Flanker, and 3 Rafale. Now, it's important to remember that the information landscape is way more of a mess than the battlefield ever was, so we gotta cross-reference these reports with some proof, some other statements, and some independent sources.
Gathering information, checking sources, compiling data, that sort of thing.
India initially denied the claim that 3 Rafales were shot down, using the contesting argument that, quote, all pilots were safely at home, which is a fancy way of trying to dodge the question by not differentiating between the pilots and the planes.
A cute choice of words.
Then almost immediately after they said that, photos surfaced on X, formerly Twitter, of a chunk of the vertical tail from what was confirmed to be an Indian Rafale, at which point India's top general would naturally then acknowledge the loss of only 1 aircraft. 3 fighter jet wrecks were located in India in total, and given that both India and Pakistan stated that neither air force left their airspace and that all combat occurred at standoff ranges, it's most likely these wrecks are Indian fighters, 2 of which were confirmed by the US to have been shot down by J-10CE export fighters from China, most likely using the PL-15E exported missile. Many Chinese and Chinese-supported Pakistani media outlets would take the shoot-down event as a massive excuse to try and broadcast their that the Spectra system was overhyped and useless. But considering some basic conceptual factors, I'm pretty sure they're just pulling the usual dictator gig where they laugh at the smallest failure like a playground bully. Because truth be told, the PL-15E missile was probably the only weapon the Pakistanis could have used to shoot down a Rafale, because an AESA radar is more jamming resistant than other active radar types. That means a clash between the Rafale's Spectra AESA jammers and the PL-15E's jamming resistant AESA radar would come down to output power, and it's possible the PL-15E probably had more power, so it resisted the jamming and continued tracking, meaning the actual missile defense came down to pilot maneuvers. I'm guessing that pilot failed those maneuvers, but because, you know, there's a danger playground where a Rafale used to be, and because India's top general would note that after that fight they, quote, changed tactics, which allowed them to penetrate Pakistani air defenses over the next couple of days and slap some of their airfields sideways. Pakistan would deny the extent of the damage, but they would acknowledge that some of their airfields were hit, and there weren't even any claimed losses that I've heard of from those events, meaning the Spectra system probably still did its job when the pilots were taking it seriously.
Just a flesh wound.
But while the Spectre system seems to hold up under fire in capable hands, the Rafale does have other issues, arguably the biggest of which is that France just can't build them fast enough. Dassault has been missing production targets for the last few years, only reaching 13 out of 15 in 2023 and 21 out of a minimum of 24 in 2024. It should be noted that the Rafale is actually one of the fastest produced jets in the world, and if they can hit their target of 3 per month in 2025, they stand to become possibly the third largest aircraft manufacturer in the world. The Rafale would only be behind the American F-35 and, at least supposedly, the Chinese J-20 and the J-10C, although we don't really know about the Chinese ones for sure because accurate information goes with China about as well as their current housing market. However, with all those orders that have been placed, Dassault may not be able to deliver on what seems to be a common sales promise to hand over a country's ordered Rafales within 3 years of signing the contract. In fact, as of 2024, France themselves only had 180 of the 234 Rafales they'd ordered, and 233 of all Rafales ordered are still on a backlog.
What's your plane?
And speaking of orders, while the Rafale was designed for low maintenance cost, it wasn't designed for low buying costs. The whole Omni-Roll tag given to it and the swaths of capabilities it can carry, not to mention all the combat-proven marketing, give it the title of being the most expensive competitor in the fighter jet market at flyaway cost estimates of over $120 million a plane. And that's not even counting the training and time it takes to master this airplane, which is not small. Pilots can have some serious difficulty with managing the aircraft because it either gives you too much feedback or not enough. A more experienced French Rafale pilot stated in a Hush Kid interview that feedback on speed is so limited you can't tell if you're going 200 knots or Mach 1.5 because of how much this thrust brick likes to accelerate. But on the other hand, you can easily get overloaded by the sensors. The pilot described the displays and readouts as being a bit much to manage for inexperienced pilots. And sometimes they just scare the holy crap out of you, like the Engine Control System, or ECS, which he described as, and I quote, loud as f***. You lose the ECS and you think you have a 2-engine fire. And the only reason they have an engine control system that computerizes the engine management is so they can give the Rafale a single throttle, which in turn was done for what I swear is the dumbest reason that I have ever heard. I swear I cannot understand how people mess this up. It is because French pilots apparently have a history across multiple platforms of shutting down the wrong engine in the event of an engine fire. I can kind of understand because most of the French fighters in their history have been single engine, but that's still only one class of military aviation. At least for the Rafale, it's manageable, especially because the pilot is basically sitting in a giant flyable Alexa. Rafale pilots can actually control certain radio communications, countermeasures, weapons, radar mode selection, and navigational functions by way of voice input commands. Which means if you fly a Rafale, you can both literally live stream an attack mission and tell the mods to ban somebody from life. It is a peak experience just waiting to happen.
Mods, crush the skull, thank you.
And the pilots definitely like the Rafale, or at the very least, they don't have any performance issues to complain about. I mean, let's be honest here, I think it says something when a Rafale pilot says that the worst thing about his airplane is the amount of noise the air conditioning makes. The export buyers don't seem to care too much either. I mean, Indonesia proceeded to order 18 more Rafales after the India-Pakistan fighting happened, bringing their planned fleet strength to a total of 60. And I think we can reasonably expect those orders to continue as Dassault readies the now in production F5 standard for delivery sometime in the 2030s. This would give the Rafale artificial intelligence agents and access to the Neuron loyal wingman drones. For France, it'll also take their first strike nuclear deterrence policy up a notch, from giving sound an existential crisis to flat out reminding it of its irrelevance with the upcoming ASN-4G nuclear hypersonic maneuverable cruise missile. Try saying that 3 times fast. There was also the recent, like a few days ago recent, surfacing of pictures on Twitter of a Rafale B sporting conformal fuel tanks mounted on top of the fuselage, a modification they had tested before but decided not to use. What's old is new again, and this plane just keeps getting more and more powerful. At this point, the only things the Rafale doesn't have are stealth and towed decoys, and that's not really a whole lot for a Swiss Army knife to be missing. So in summation, if you ever see the Rafale on your team, you can breathe a sigh of relief because it is not there to play games, and if someone wants to live stream one of those attack missions, hit me up so I can keep track of the kill streak for the scoreboard. Thank you for watching. We got merch and other links in the description, and if you like what you saw, please consider checking out some of my other videos. You might like what you find. Until next time, dismissed.